Hello everyone. Let us look at the scatter chart, one of my personal favorites. The scatter chart looks like this. It allows you to have two variables, one on the x and one on the y-axis. So let's come to our Power BI file. We'll make a new page. Let's call this the scatter. All right. So first we create the scatter chart, and here I want to keep something in the y and something in the x-axis. So let me keep my profit in the y and the sales in the x-axis. In the values, we will add our market. There are 5 of them. And in the legend, we will add our segment. There are 3 of them. Hence, we will get 15 dots. Each one of them is representing a market and a segment. In the size, we will also add the sales value. And then finally, in the play axis, I do not want to add the entire order date. I just want to click on the drop down and only select the month and add it to the play axis. Now we can add a border and shadow, which we already know how to do. And then in the visual, I will add a zoom slider. In the markers, I will add a color border. We will also add the category label. So I've done quite a bit. Take your time, no hurry. Make sure to catch up with me, pause the video if required, and do all these things. Then we will continue. Okay. Now the scatter chart essentially tells us two variables. So it tells us that for APAC consumer, the sales is 2,33,000 and the profit is 19,000 for the month of December. But the question is, which December? Now remember, we have the data for 4 years, right? So maybe I just want to see the data for 2022 December. What this is doing right now is to aggregate all the 4 years together, which might not be what I want. So I want to make a slicer, and in the slicer, we will keep our year. And then by clicking on the format, slicer settings, we will change it to a tile. Don't worry about the slicers. I have an entire video that explains how to work with slicers in much more detail. For now, just make it. Don't worry too much. Another tip for everyone, we also have Format Painter in Power BI. So I can select a visual, go to Home, select the Format Painter, and just click on another visual, and the same formatting will be applied there as well. So when we click on 2019, you notice we get the scatter like this. And when I click on the play button, it actually shows me the change over time. How cool is that? Like I said, one of my most favorite and most practical visualizations. All my clients absolutely love it. Okay, what else can we do with this visualization? Now, if I make a copy, duplicate, let's call this scatter 2. Let me remove the segment from the legend. Let's keep it simple. Now you notice that when I click on Asia Pacific, there is a line and it tells me how is Asia Pacific moved between the 12 months. Now this might seem a little complicated. So let me remove the month from the play axis and replace that with the year. And we don't also need the slicer now, so we can remove that. Think about it. When I click on Africa, it tells me how has Africa changed over the last 4 years. Similarly for USCA, for LATAM, and for the other markets as well. So this is a great way to see the change over time. Let's make one more scatter. Now, similar to what I had shown you in the table when I showed you that there is a clusters option that you have available, we can do that here as well. But first, let me remove the market and replace that with the customer name. Now, remember, there are hundreds of customers we have. Let's also remove the size. So we have the data like this. Let me see if I can add a border. Okay, it seems we can't do that, but that should be okay. So here again, I will remove the zoom slider as well. And finally, I will remove the play axis as well. So essentially, it's just a simple chart where we have the sales on the X, the profit on the Y, and the customer name in the values. Now imagine you want to run a marketing campaign and I ask you to tell me which cluster has customers which are similar to each other and which cluster should we focus on more. How do you decide that? For this, I can click on the three dots, select automatically find clusters. I can say I want 5 clusters, for example. And when I click on OK, now you notice we have 5 clusters like this. How cool is that? So this is really helpful when you want to do a targeted campaign. If I make a table, and in the table, if I keep my customer name clusters, you will notice that this new field has been created automatically when you create clusters. So I will put this in my table, and I will also keep my sales and profit in the table. So you will notice that it also tells me for each of these 5 clusters. So if I select cluster 1, what is the sales and what is the profit? Similarly for the other clusters as well, like this. I can also click here on the legend to simply highlight it like this. So it's a very interesting piece of analysis because if you look at cluster 3, which are the customers high on sales and high on profit, it's 19 lakh and 3,62,000. But if you think about it, 3,62,000 is much lesser than cluster 1, which is 6,60,000. So from an absolute perspective, the contribution to profit coming from cluster 1, which is this one, is much higher than cluster 3, which seems to be the better customers. And the reason is very simple, right? It is because of the density. The number of customers in cluster 1 are so much more than the number of customers in cluster 3. In fact, we can check that. If I just keep my customer name in the table and we'll change it to the count, it tells us the number of transactions, but if I change it to the distinct count, then it tells me how many unique customers are there in each cluster. So the reason cluster 3 is very profitable, but in absolute terms, while the profit margin is very high, in absolute terms, the profit is lesser than cluster 1 is because the number of customers in this cluster are very few compared to cluster 1. So if I look at profit, you can see that the order is like this: 1, 3, 2, 5, and 4. So if you look at cluster 5, this one, you can see that the profit coming is only 2,30,000, and cluster 4, you will see that it's actually unprofitable. So you're incurring a loss of 46,000. So these are probably 61 customers where you have to take some action because they are not performing very well for the business.